This is Back of the Net and Beyond. My name's Danny Thomas, and today I'm going to be speaking to Michael Lyons, who's a former teammate and a former Derby midfielder. How's it going, Mickey? You okay?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, mate. Good to catch up after all these years.
Ridiculous. Last time we caught up was what, 16?
Yeah, it was. So we started at Lilleshall '95, left in '97. And we haven't spoken since then, mate, which is crazy because I don't think we even played against each other after. I'm not sure.
Actually, we didn't play against each other, but I remember when I left Forest and then I remember coming to Derby on trial and I was probably there for a week. So that was probably the last time we saw each other. But I think we're still kind of 16 years old. So long time.
Still very young, mate. Yeah, still very young. But it seems, you can probably empathise. It just seems like another lifetime in a way when you think back to it. But
it's scary, mate. Nearly 40 years old. It's time's flying.
Crazy. Are you 40 yet, or are you 40 next year?
No, I'll be 40 next year. So
you're like me then. We still got a bit of time.
I know. Yeah, still hanging on. Yeah, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. As I mentioned before, kind of previous people that have listened to the podcast, it's generally about making people aware that athletes have transferable skills, which essentially are suitable to other industries, other kind of organisations, different careers. And also it's about making kind of those industry leaders aware that athletes are out there and they are employable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So in terms of you, I want to take it kind of way back to the start, kind of in terms of football, essentially. Where did it all start for you?
Yeah, it's a good starting question, really. So my brother Patrick, who's sort of 3 or 4 years older than me, he got involved in football from a young age, maybe 8, 9, and was a good player. From an early age, he was a good player, and he was identified as someone that was talented. And I suppose as the younger brother, I just looked up to him, and we'd be out in the garden, practicing, playing. And I suppose, it was that competing mentality as a younger brother, really, to say, well, I want to be as good as him, or, if I can be better, or, So that played a part, because actually my dad didn't play at all. He wasn't much of a sportsman. My oldest brother, not really into sport or football. He was more of an academic, really. It was very much my brother Patrick, and then as you know, Danny, it just sort of takes shape from there. You start to become a bit obsessed with it, really. Once you think, oh, I'm actually all right at this game. And then you obviously have coaches that are quite influential. I had a couple of coaches at Derby when I was probably 10 or 11 that were very influential and very supportive. And it just sort of took shape from there. And before I knew it, I was someone that was quite talented in my age group, and it wasn't the case when I was 10. It was, it just started to happen when I was sort of 12, 13, just before obviously Lilleshall started to kick off. It just sort of started to take shape from there, really, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, for those that don't know, in order to get into Lilleshall, there's a series of trials, which essentially means they get a bunch of players together from different kind of areas across the UK, and you kind of being assessed, normally for 1 or 2 days, sometimes longer. And I remember going to those trials, kind of Midlands, and obviously you're from Derby, kind of in and around that area, and I'm from Leamington. So we're always kind of in the same kind of trialist group. And I remember like coming across you thinking, like, we're both small, and we were obviously both small then as well, like tiny, slight build and really small in height. I remember just seeing you, I just used to think, like, this guy's so good on the ball and that, and he's like small, and he's playing in midfield. And I was a striker, and I used to rely a lot on my pace back then. I didn't really have much game understanding because obviously we were only young, really. But I remember you were like a bit different. You were kind of real technical, wasn't strong, but you couldn't, you wouldn't look at you and say, oh, he's not strong, because you would hold your own. And you were always one of the like most confident ones off the pitch, because I was really like quiet, especially as a young going into kind of like new surroundings. You're meeting people that you've never met before. And you always seem to be one who was always like in and around like the banter, even at a young age. I didn't even know what banter was then. It was just a case of going, playing and going home. So I remember that was the first time I kind of come across you, and then obviously the more and more you progress, I kept seeing you, and I don't think we really spoke until it was kind of at Lillyshaw, essentially.
That's it. And then we were in the room together, weren't we?
Yeah, and I want to touch on that a bit later on. So now you're kind of, what, 10, 11, and you kind of realise people are talking about you, and you're kind of the best in your kind of peer group and whatever else, best in your area, or one of them anyway. And then what happened? Were you playing Sunday League, and then?
Yeah, just playing loads of football, mate. As you can probably remember yourself. I mean, it's not like now where, you know, literally from the age of 6 or 7, which is ridiculous. You know, they can only play for one team, which is the academy. You know, if they're good enough at that level. Whereas back in the day, you know, you were playing for Derby or Leicester in your circumstances. Then you'd play for your district team, you'd then play for your Sunday League team, and then you'd play for your school team. You know, you'd have 4 teams, but you'd love every team, really. You know, you'd be so passionate about playing, and you know, we had some good players. I mean, one of the players that went on to make it, actually, who I played with from maybe 10, was a guy called Chris Riggott, who ended up playing for Middlesbrough and played at a decent level. And he was someone within Derby, and obviously Kev Nicholson, who was England schoolboy captain. So we had some really good players around Derby, and Goffey as well. Stephen Goff. So it's funny how you said, oh, actually, Mickey, you were, you know, someone that was stood out as someone quite technical. And because I was quite small, I needed to be technical. You know, I had no, and I'll come on to probably talk about this, but as I got older, I had no athletic strengths, really. And I think in the end, that's probably was the pivotal thing for me. So my game had to be so tight. You know, my first touch had to be brilliant. You know, my awareness had to be brilliant, because I just couldn't compete physically. So my brain had to be quicker, you know. So I really, and there's a natural element to that as well. I think I just, you know, had that natural ability to be able to play that way, I think. And then the technical side just came into it as well. And I probably surprised myself when I went on the Lillyshaw trials in terms of how well I did. I probably went into it thinking I'll probably do the regional trial, and, you know, if I get through that, like, I'll be happy. But I all of a sudden just started to get through the next one and the next one. And it was like, oh, well, I'm getting quite close here. You know, so. Brilliant.
And for those that don't know, off the top of my head, I'm sure those trials went on for about a year. It was a long time, wasn't it? A long time. And obviously at that point, you're still going to school. You don't know who you are. You haven't discovered yourself yet. So it was all new. And indirectly, there was a lot of pressure there, but I didn't feel it. I don't know about you, but you were just going out and just playing, essentially.
Oh, I got quite nervous, mate.
Did you?
And this is another thing as well. I got quite anxious when I played football. So like before games, and actually I do remember this about you. You were very relaxed, very laid back character. And I used to think, like, Danny's so chilled. Like, you know, I wish I was more like that. I'd get horrible butterflies, mate, before, sometimes even before training. You know, and again, that was probably more at Lillyshaw, because I felt as though at times there's a term called imposter syndrome. I don't know if you come across that. I had a little bit of that. I had a lot of that at Lillyshaw. I thought quite often, should I be here? You know, but obviously I don't want to jump ahead. But coming back, during those trials, I'd put a lot of pressure on myself and be like, I have to be as good as I can possibly be today. Otherwise, I'm not going to get anywhere near it. And maybe that helped me to perform. and I always had a very good attitude. You know, I was always very attentive to the coaches, always listening.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm honest, like trying to be the busiest one in the session. Because again, well, yeah, because again, I didn't stand out physically. I thought, how am I going to stand out? Well, I've got to be busy. I've got to be good attitude, and I've got to like technically be on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was my experience really.
Yeah, I can understand. And I mean, yeah, I understand where you're coming from when you say busy. And again, I do remember you kind of, the coaches always used to draw to you in terms of like having a conversation. I was always like in the background. I'm talking about the trialist stages and things like that.
Yeah.
Players that always knew the coaches, like you and Kev always knew such and such. It was like, how does this happen? It was all new to me. And I was just one of those that would just go, do my thing and go home. So from that perspective, again, I remember how you were the early days, like on the field. You always came across like quite confident, and then off it, similar thing. So it's like, I wouldn't say crazy. It's just I weren't expecting you to say what you just said in terms of how you felt, because that didn't come across. Which again, that's probably a good thing, because if you felt that way and then you portrayed it, people would pick up on that and maybe use that against you, and use it to their advantage. You know what it's like in football, if people can kind of get one-upmanship at any point.
Oh,
naturally they'll do that. So then you've obviously gone.
I was going to say, I think on the outgoing part of my personality, like outside of the pitch, again, that was, I mean, I am outgoing, don't get me wrong, I'm a very social person. I like interacting with people, and probably why I've ended up in the career I'm in as well.
Yeah.
But again, there was still not an anxiety there, but a case of, you know, I wasn't the biggest, you know, I wasn't someone that could walk into a room and like own the room physically or anything like that. So I think when you're smaller, sometimes you need something else, you know, and I suppose I've always liked the banter and always liked having a bit of a laugh as well, you know. But yeah, so it's interesting to hear you say that, mate, to be honest, because it wasn't always coming from an area of like massive confidence, to be honest. It was just a way of me coping as well. So
I mean, so you've obviously gone through the stage of kind of playing for your school team and kind of your local team or whatever else, and then you're at Derby, kind of indirectly, as you said before, kind of you could play for 3 or 4 different teams, and it was all legal and above board then. It's slightly different now, but obviously Derby's put you forward, and you've gone to the trials for obviously Lillishall, and then you've obviously got in. So how did it feel like when you opened that letter? Was it you that opened it, your mum or dad? Like what was the process?
So this is one of the distinct memories I have of when I was younger, because you know what it's like when you get older, your memory of things when you're a teenager just start to drift. But this one sticks in the memory, and actually the letter landed, and it was actually my sister Michelle that said, "Michael, there's a big letter that's landed, like an A4 size envelope. Do you think it's the FA or to do with Lillishall?" Because we were expecting it. So she brought it upstairs. I was still in bed, to be honest, and she opened it, and she didn't obviously pull the letters out, so I pulled it out, and I didn't know what to expect. But when I saw the starting line of, "I'm delighted to be able to offer you a place at the national school," I mean, I must admit, it's one of the most elated feelings I think I've ever had. Because, and you'll probably relate to this, because those trials were so drawn out and so long and quite pressurized, I think, towards the end, because we almost had it was like a 4-day trial, the last one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think we did like an interview even. I think we even had like interviews, or we had like time with the coaches.
I think we did. I remember having like IQ tests and things like that as well. So yeah, it was intense.
We had a heart scan and all that sort of, like we had like medicals and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was almost like building you up, over a year. So to actually then get the letter to say you're in, I mean, it'll still go down. As one of the best achievements, in my life. And how many lads really can will be able to look back on a moment like that. So you've got to cherish it, to be honest.
And then obviously, so you've gone to Lillyshaw. How did you find it? Like, obviously, you were there for 2 years, 14 to 16. Those are like pivotal years in your kind of development stages. How did you find it?
God, where do I start, mate? I mean, honestly, because there's so many aspects to it. I mean, there's so many layers, I think if I was to try and categorize the different parts of it, I mean, initially you drop in there, and obviously we were juniors, weren't you? And you had the senior group. And I think I was just so starstruck, even at that point, by the senior group. So you obviously suss out your new teammates, and we had some incredible players in our group, Scott Parker, Francis Jeffers, Alan Smith initially, Lee Cannaville, and again, coming back to my point of imposter syndrome, you think, well, I'm good at football, I know I'm good at football, particularly in Derby. I'm a big fish in a small pond. You go there, and all of a sudden it's like the rules of the game change. You're like, I'm like the worst player. I'm potentially the worst player in this group. But then you look at the senior group, and I don't know if you remember this. There was a game that we played. It was one of the first sessions we had where you play against the senior group. So it was juniors versus seniors. Yeah. And we had Keith Blunt as the coach, who was like incredible, and God bless his soul, because I know he's passed on, but he was a hard coach, but like a great coach. Yeah. He was like, right, juniors, you've got as many touches as you want, and seniors, you're on one touch. I don't know if you remember this. And they battered us. Yeah. I think it was like 5 or 6-0, and Michael Owen scored 4, in that game. And you were just like, this is different level of football, just incredible.
Yeah, it was scary, and sometimes I try and kind of tell people only when they ask, and it's hard to kind of express kind of how it was. And I always draw on people like Michael Owen and Wes Brown just because they're household names. So as soon as you say that, people will realise the standard you're talking about, Scott Parker, Francis Jeffers. It was just, for me, when I went there, similar to you. So I was always kind of the best or one of the best in my area. Went to the trial, so Midlands, kind of Warwickshire, whatever. And I was still kind of holding my own as one of the best. And I was a striker. And then I went to Lillyshaw, and I don't know if you remember, you have to put down your second favourite position. So I didn't really have one, but I was left foot. So I just said left midfield. Didn't even say left wing. I just said left midfield. And then throughout my time at Lillyshaw, I ended up just playing left.
Yeah, you were always left side, weren't you? Yeah.
So, but when I went there, it was like, wow. So you look at Stuart Taylor, who was still growing, but he was like 6'4". But then you've got Matthew.
Great keeper as well. Great. I thought he was a great keeper. Yeah.
And then you've got Matthew Gent, same standard. But he was like 6'3", but he was like a man shaving.
He was a man.
Then you've got Kev, who I'm gonna say Kev probably hasn't grown, but Kev was like built like a man. Because if now I'm 5'7", so I've grown, and that just shows you how small me and you were. But I think Kev's probably the same height. He's always stocky, and Lee Cannaville and other people, and I was always one of the fastest until I went to Lillyshaw, and I was probably the 4th fastest in the team. It was just a different kettle of fish.
I think what struck me as well was what's the word I'm looking for, with the senior players in that first year, how ahead of us they were. So like Kenny Lunn, and do you remember Jamie Day, who's playing midfield? You just couldn't get near them. You couldn't get near them at all. And the one thing I think that Lillyshaw did for all of us, and particularly for me, the way your game developed, during that 2 years, and whether you were going to make it or not, there's no way you can say at the end of the 2 years that you didn't become an exceptional player in some way, in terms of the way that you control a ball, pass a ball, know the next pass, see a picture. Yeah. There's no way you would have got that, I don't think. Well, this is what I think anyway, within an academy setting, because it was so intense. And look, you know, there are players that didn't go there, and obviously were exceptional as well. You know, there's many of those, but I think everyone in our group improved exponentially during those 2 years. And just some great experiences, mate. I mean, I think, you know, meeting some great friends, you know, some great funny people, funny situations, you know, and a real character builder. I mean, one of the toughest moments was, which you might recall, was we obviously had England schoolboy trials whilst you're at Lilleshall, and you know, I didn't make it into England schoolboys, and that was tough because it almost created like a bit of a subgroup. Yeah. So you were at Lilleshall, but you weren't in England schoolboys. So that was quite tough. But again, I didn't really, at the time, I thought, I'm not going to let this affect me because there's still so much else to be positive about at the school. But the only other thing I'd say, mate, is that, and I think you've touched on this in your other podcasts, is there were some players that you just knew were going to make it. Like, without a shadow of a doubt, there was 2 or 3 in each group, or, you know, that were definitely going to make it, you know, and then there was some that had a good chance of making it. And then I would class myself probably in the lower category of, you could make it, but there's still a bit to go, you know. And that's how I sort of saw myself, really. I never saw myself as like one of the best there, not, you know, but I saw myself as someone that could improve.
That's it. I was pretty much the same. So I second that, and I'd probably say I second everything you just said. I mean, in terms of Lilleshall, I kind of left there with a lot more game understanding. So what I tend to say, and I've probably said this many times on like the podcast before, when I looked at people like Scott Parker, Lee Canaville, Kevin Nicholson, Paul Wheatcroft, people like that, Francis Jeffers, they all had like some game understanding. Obviously we all did, otherwise we wouldn't be there. But theirs was a slightly different level. So I was always kind of tentative in training, I wanted to learn. I had to learn more about the game. And again, I was basically starting a new position because I went there solely as a striker, and then I ended up playing left wing. And then in terms of kind of England schoolboys, my way around that was, that's not proper England. Like, we're proper England.
Yeah,
that was me. And I always knew as well, because before we had the England schoolboy trials, I think we had like a prep talk, and there was rumours going around that if you're small, generally you get in. It was always the bigger players that would get in, and that happened to, well, we were evidence to that. We've seen it. Because of my birthday, I think your birthday as well, we had an opportunity to play in the year younger as well.
Yeah, the year below.
Still didn't get in.
So, no. I mean, I mean, but when you look at some of the players, mate, I mean, you know, I think there was a lad called Michael Standing, you know, who was a midfielder, and I remember him coming to the trials and going, he's a good player, you know. Even though I'm at Lilleshall, I looked at him and thought, he's quality, you know. So there was still a good standard of players outside the school as well that you knew you'd compete against. I mean, another one was Leon Osmond. Do you remember him?
Class, yeah.
I mean, oh my word! Like, when we played Everton, we had a game against Everton away. I think it's the only game we lost.
Yeah, probably right.
We got beat because he just ran the show.
Yeah.
You know, so there were still some players outside of the school that you thought, I'll do well to be better than them, if that makes sense. Yeah. But no, you know, if you think of some of the tours we had there as well, you know, we had went to the Nordics, went to Thailand, went to Brazil. Yeah. You know,
I missed them because I was injured. So I was in the squad. It was a squad with the seniors, weren't it?
That's right. Yeah. It was John Harley and.
Yeah. So I had a hairline fracture in my back. Don't know if you can remember.
Yeah.
And
I remember actually. Yeah.
I ended up missing those, so that was a bit of a shame. But yeah, it was one of those situations that there was no way I could have gone anyway. They were pretty strict, weren't they, around injuries as well? Yeah, you know, if you weren't fit, you know, it was a case of, look, we've got to take players that, you know, that are fit and ready to go. But
Yeah, I mean, look, just a great experience, and it's hard to almost explain it to people that haven't been there. You know, it's a bit of a special club, really, isn't it? Of you know, and so great experience, really. I can't say any more than that.
Same here. So then you've obviously graduated from Lilleshall, and then a couple of months off, school holidays, and then you start your apprenticeship at Derby, and obviously Derby held you in high regards, I remember as well, just like they did with all of us, just natural kind of progression. So talk to me about your time at Derby. Like, how did you find it? Obviously you go there and like there's big expectations because people are saying, well, here's Nicky Lyons, went to Lilleshall, played for England, so we're expecting him to like perform for us. So just talk me through kind of how you felt stepping into those shoes.
So if I look at Derby, it was quite tough, I think, overall. If I look at the whole 3 years that I had, because basically I'd agreed post Lilleshall to be there 3 years. So, you know, in the old world, prior to the 3-year apprenticeship, if you like, that you have now, I did a year's apprenticeship and then agreed that I'd turn pro at 17. So did 2-year pro after that. So I knew I had 3 years there. But yeah, there was expectation, I think, for yourself, but also the club bringing you in, think, right, we've got someone that could go and be a bit of a homegrown talent, bit of a star for us. And that's all I was focused on, to be honest, Danny. Like I wanted that more than anything. You know, it was my home club. I'd watched Derby since the age of 8. I was very passionate about the club, and I wanted to be I wanted to be that player for them. You know, a bit of a midfield dynamo, to be honest.
Yeah.
When I actually started at Derby, that was probably one of the best Derby teams I think we've had in the last 30 years.
Really?
So yeah, if you think about the squad we had then, so it was Wangchop, it was Baiano, Iranio, Bohinen, Rowett, Christian Day. You know, for a Derby team, we had some great players. You know, we had some great players, and I think in that first season, that Derby finished 8th in the Prem. So, you know, I think they even beat like the invincible teams like 3-0. You know, so they were a good solid team. And I suppose the reason I'm saying that is the depth of the squad in the first team and reserves was massive. So you knew there was a test on, really, to almost sort of progress through, get through to the reserves, and almost prove to Jim Smith at the time that you were someone that could compete. This was probably where I started to maybe think, have I got it? Because I came from Lilleshall and I stood out technically without a shadow of a doubt, and I was ahead of people from a game situation, game thinking, understanding. I was a step ahead in terms of seeing pictures, but physically and athletically I was way off it, you know. So whether that was speed, whether it was power, whether it was getting up for headers, that was something that just wasn't me. But anything that was ball at the feet, passing, you know, I was as good as anyone. But it just sort of got to a point where I think the coaches looked at me and thought, I'm not sure we could put him ahead of a Darryl Powell or a Lars Bohinen or a, you know, and being honest, Danny, as well, my consistency struggled. So one game I'd be outstanding, and then the next 2 I wouldn't quite be at the races. You know, sometimes I get substituted at like 60 minutes because I've not been in the game, I've not been on the ball enough. And that hit my confidence. And I think I felt after year 1 that I might be up against it. I did have a good spell in the reserves in year 2 where I probably played about 10 games on the bounce, 10 or 15 games. And I did quite well. Probably the turning point, we played Sunderland away in the reserves, played at the Stadium of Light, actually. And I picked up the ball and was pushing forward. And do you remember Gavin McCann, who used to play for Sunderland? He was playing at the time. I think he was like a regular first team, was coming back. And I touched the ball, and as I touched it, he came in full throttle, right onto my right ankle. Ooh. And probably the worst injury I had. I tore all my ligaments. I was out for about 3 or 4 months, which carried through into the third season. Like my last season.
Right.
So that was tough. I mean, I struggled after that injury as well to get my fitness back and my form back. But I've got no excuses, mate. I think in the end it just didn't quite happen for me. I think athletically I probably wasn't good enough. Okay. And the way I look at it now is, if you're a technical player, you've got to be outstanding technically. You know, you've got to almost be like a David Silva, where you literally just don't make a wrong decision throughout the whole game. You know, and even David Silva was probably quite quick. You know, he was probably still quite quick. And so I was never like that good, you know, technically, to be able to play at the top level. You know, I think that's how I sort of look at it, really. You know, I'm pretty honest about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an honest kind of outlook on it, really. Yeah. And this is what I want to hear, because sometimes people don't see this side of the game. And they just assume that you kind of leave school, do your apprenticeship in the first team or reserves or whatever, and then you kick on from there. And yeah, that can happen, but sometimes it doesn't. And obviously you're prime example of that. I mean, how did it make you feel when they kind of said, look, we're not going to kind of keep you on? What was your thought process? What were you thinking at that point?
Well, I mean, I can remember, that's one of the days I remember as well, if I look back. And I remember getting the news. Do you remember John Peacock? Yeah, so John Peacock was actually a coach at Lilleshall sometimes, wasn't he, for us? Yeah. And I mean, I knew John from when I was 10 or 11.
Oh, okay.
John ended up becoming the academy, head of the academy at Derby when I was there.
Right.
So we got to year 3 for me, and it was him and Billy McEwen, who was the reserve team manager, who basically said, look, technically we can't fault you. You know, you're a great player. You know, on the ball, no one really can compete, but it's just this physical side of the game. It's this athletic side. It's probably the consistency as well. Just said, look, we've had a chat with the first team manager, obviously at the time, Jim Smith, and whilst he'd love to be able to keep you, he just doesn't know where he could fit you into that team or into his thoughts long term. So we're going to have to let you go.
Right.
And I did have an inkling beforehand that could be the case, but it's just when you hear it, there's nothing worse, and your whole dreams get shattered in that one moment. And I remember just going somewhere quiet, and I was upset. You know, I was upset. I had a cry, and you know, you basically, everything that you've put your heart and soul into is not going to happen. Well, at least with that club. Yeah. You know, and I was very wedded to Derby. You know, I'm from Derby. But luckily, I had close family and friends, and you regroup, and you just think, well, look, I've got to pick myself up and realise that, you know, Derby is just one club. You know, there could be other options. So that's where I then started to look at other clubs.
Okay.
2 clubs were interested at the time. One was Plymouth.
Right. Okay.
And there's a funny story on this one, actually, Danny, because they watched me on a trial. We used to have these exit trials. I don't know if you remember. So all the lads that get released go to something called exit trials, which is a weird situation because you got basically loads of lads turning up with their heads hanging.
Yeah.
You know, and having to go and play against each other when they've just been released.
Yeah.
But quite useful because you got all the scouts from the Football League going to watch. And basically Plymouth came forward and Bury came forward.
Okay.
So went to Plymouth. 6-hour train journey, got to the station, and the first team manager, I can't even remember who it was now. I bet if I checked it, I'll be able to say, right, Plymouth manager in 2000, who was it? But he basically said, "Hello, Mickey, how you doing?" He said, "I thought you'd be bigger."
Oh, wow.
I was like, what? I know. I was like, is the scout not put that in his report that I was only like 5 foot nothing? So that just didn't work out, because I think from day dot he was just like, I'm not sure, because they were Div 3 at the time as well.
Yeah. Physical league at them times.
Oh God, yeah. And then cut long story short, that didn't work, and I wouldn't have signed for Plymouth anyway, mate. It was just too far. Didn't fancy it really as a location. I went to Bury.
Yeah.
And Andy Priest was the manager of Bury. Do you remember? He was like a striker.
Yeah.
Really good guy, really, really nice guy. And I ended up getting offered a contract with them.
Okay.
They offered me 150 quid a week.
What? That's a joke.
Honestly, I swear. Yeah, 150 quid a week to do a year's pro. I mean, they were struggling for cash at the time.
Yeah.
Like really struggling. This was the pivotal moment. This is a critical part of this podcast, actually, Danny.
Okay.
Because this is a message, I think, that is useful to share. So I was very tempted, even though it was 150 quid a week, to take that contract, because I thought it keeps my dream going potentially in football.
Yeah.
You know, if I do well at Bury, get a run of games, who knows? I could be back up the leagues. But I remember having a very sort of memorable conversation with my dad, and my dad was like, "Michael," he said, "great that you've got an offer, great that you could, you know, play league football potentially for Bury, you know, still a very notable club. I think they were Div 2.
Yeah.
But at the time, I'd had an offer to go to Loughborough University.
Okay.
To do a scholarship. Basically, Derby had a link with one of the tutors at Loughborough, and he was doing all of our academic stuff at Derby, a guy called Darren Robinson.
Right.
And Darren basically said, "Look, if you don't find a club, I will ensure that you get a scholarship at Loughborough Uni, and you'll get onto a sports science degree at uni."
Wow.
Which at the time you needed to get 2 A's and a B to get onto it, at A level.
Wow.
And I mean, I was like, "Okay, Darren, yeah. I mean, I've still got this dream I want to pursue. I'm not sure."
Yeah.
But my dad said, "Michael," he said, "you realise that the chance to get a degree versus this contract at Bury," he said, "you got to weigh that up. You know, if you turn Loughborough down and it doesn't work out at Bury, what are you left with? You might not get that opportunity to go to Loughborough next year."
True.
So I ended up listening to him, and I just said to Bury, I said, "Look, appreciate your offer. I mean, obviously the money was terrible, so
yeah,
didn't make it that difficult. But I said, I'm going to take this scholarship at Loughborough." And honestly, Danny, it was the best decision I think I made.
Really?
Yeah, because the experience I had there was incredible, you know, and there was other lads that I met there that also had got released from clubs.
Okay.
So I had a bit of a peer group.
Yeah.
I'm conscious I'm talking a lot here. Sorry if you want to interject.
Oh, no, this is what I want. Yeah, it's about you. It's not about me. So I'm just, I'm intrigued to hear what you.
For anyone listening, this is what I was like at Lillishall. Just used to talk loud. But yeah, it was one of the best decisions I made, and I was a bit apprehensive because I thought, am I going to go into an environment where no one's ever been at a club, no one's really, you know, played for a team like Derby, or, you know, they'd maybe just played good district football or something. But there was lads there from all football league clubs, you know, and we were a really good side actually at Loughborough, you know, as you can imagine, at that level.
Yeah, of course.
But at the same time, it was difficult because I was turning my back on the game, you know, the professional game. And I suppose that was the point really, Danny, where, you know, if I look at you and people like Lee Cannibal and those guys that actually went on to play a bit of league football, that's where I went down a completely different road to the road that you guys were still on. you know, at the age of 19 or 20. So it was still difficult mentally at the time to deal with it. But when I look back, being at Loughborough was incredible.
That's massive. And obviously that's a massive decision. If you kind of think about where you are now in terms of maturity, 39, 19, 20, 21, 22, you're still really, really young. And to make that decision, because obviously you've got a dream, you've been playing all those years beforehand, training every day, been to Lillyshaw, you can see kind of everyone else who you probably assume that you were better than some players who were kicking on, and that's just a natural feeling to have. But you can see people kind of progressing, or what you deem as progressing within their footballing career, and they've gone right and you've gone left. And that's commendable, because that's not easy, especially at a young age. And that must have been a tough decision to obviously make. So I can only commend you for that, because obviously you've gone on to great things, which I want to touch on a bit later on.
Absolutely.
So you've made that transition, and you're obviously now at Loughborough, and you mentioned, I think it helped you because you had a peer group there, and you could kind of have conversations, and obviously those conversations you'd obviously resonate with, because they've been through that kind of similar pathway to you, been released, and now they're there. So I'm assuming that made things slightly easier for yourself. So then obviously what happened after Loughborough then? Like, where did you go? What next? What was it next for you?
So this is where there was a real divergence away from football, to be honest, because the longer you're out of the game, you know, the more you just sort of distance yourself from the fact that it's never going to come back, if that makes sense. And Loughborough was 4 years, so I did 3 years sports science degree, and then I did a master's degree for a year, which was a marketing and management degree. Being honest, I didn't know what I was going to do, so I thought I'll do another degree. And there was a good group of lads I was living with at the time, and we just stayed there another year, who were also good at football as well, actually, and you know, we're in a similar situation. After I left, again, probably another difficult period where it was like, what do I actually want to do? And this probably links to what this is all about, really, in terms of what you're sharing, Danny, is that you have to think very hard, I think, as an ex-sports person, about what your skills are. Because it's not as if you've gone down the road of doing medicine, or you've gone down the road of doing a particular science, or, you know, and you sort of know what your career is going to be at the end of it. Or you do finance, you know, and you're going to end up in banking or something like that. I think when you transition from sport, you can't really specify anything, you know, in terms of a skill set. I think what the 4 or 5 things you do have, though, are, you know, you've worked in a team environment, you've had to perform under pressure, you've had to be resilient, you've had to deal with knockbacks, you know, and you've had to sort of pick yourself up quite often. And you're probably someone as well that's, dare I say it, you're probably quite confident about yourself as well, typically, because you've been good at the sport, you know, or you've been one of the best at something, you know. So I just looked at those skills and thought, where could that take me? And being honest, one of the biggest industries really is sales, recruitment. There's a lot of ex-sports people in recruitment, or just sort of business to business interaction. And I ended up just applying for a few roles after Loughborough and getting some interviews. And one of them was with a quite small business at the time, which basically sold products into schools. So it was almost like a careers product that I sold into secondary schools, where it would help students understand what they want to do when they're older. So it's a bit of an irony, really, to the conversation, because obviously it's what we're talking about. But that was a great first job, because basically I'd go in and I'd do like presentations in front of like year groups. And I'd like present this product. And I'd be going to like inner city Birmingham, sometimes down to London. I'd go to independent school. So it was really varied.
Yeah.
And I'd have to stand up and just talk to them about this product and then answer questions and things like that. So it was a first job.
Yeah.
That was great, you know, in terms of communication, confidence in front of people, selling. And then I did that for 2 or 3 years, and you know, I felt as though I'd sort of gone as far as I could with that business. And then I knew a couple of people that worked in recruitment,
right?
And one of them lived in London, and I thought, actually, I've always wanted to maybe sample another city, you know, and I actually moved to London to work in recruitment.
Oh, nice.
For a couple of years. Yeah. So this was back in 2006.
Right.
And that was a real baptism of fire, actually. That was, you know, here's a CV of someone. There's a list of 100 people. Go and call that list and sell that candidate to that list.
Wow.
It was like Wolf of Wall Street stuff. Yeah. You know, so again, this is quite interesting in terms of the story. If you think I've gone from like thinking I was going to make it as a footballer, going to uni, not knowing what I was going to do, and then, you know, falling into sales, and all of a sudden I'm in this like boiler room in London selling CVs to, you know, to a list of clients, like doing cold calling.
Jeez.
I know, crazy. I was still playing non-league football at the time, by the way, so I was still involved in football, but it was like non-league.
Yeah.
It took a back seat. I mean, I was just very centered then on trying to be successful in a new career.
Yeah, of course.
So I wasn't particularly good at recruitment when I started. I was awful. But you know, if you speak to people in recruitment, they'll say that there's a moment where the penny drops, and you start to link it all together as a job. And once you understand the market and you build a relationship network, it's a great job and it's a great career. So I ended up joining the business I'm now in. After that period, I came back into the Midlands and I joined Michael Page, the company I work for now.
Oh yeah, Birmingham. I know Michael Page. Massive company.
Massive business, yeah. So, you know, again, I was quite fortunate in that the experience that I had with a business in London, which was a technology recruiter, stood me in good stead for the interview with Page, because it's quite hard to get into Michael Page. I mean, unless you need to have a degree, you need to probably have some sales experience or recruitment experience, and it's like a 4-stage interview. Wow. You know, and you're meeting like 3 or 4 directors in those interviews. You're getting absolutely grilled. You know, I'd probably say now that some of the interview techniques they probably couldn't use now. It was like, right, we're just going to sit you here for like 3 hours and you know, just literally like interrogate you. But yeah, got in. Yeah. And I've never looked back since then, Danny. I mean, I think the disappointment of not making it as a footballer has just channeled my ambition into this career. And I've gone from almost like ground level to now to quite a senior role in the company. You know, so at the moment I'm operating director for the Midlands, which incorporates some of the businesses in the Midlands because we're quite big. So there's other directors as well, but I'm one of the board members in the Midlands for Michael Page. So you know, don't get me wrong, it's been a tough journey because, you know, in the 10 years I've been here, you know, there's been some dark days where, you know, you have to really pick yourself up because you're having a bad month personally, you know, from a sales perspective, or when you go on to manage teams, your teams are having a bad month or a bad period and you've got to lead them through a tough period. Yeah. So, but all of the skills I learned coming through as a footballer or coming through Lilleshall or coming through Derby, I still use today. Really? You know, I still, yeah. Whether it's, you know, getting back from disappointment, taking knockbacks, dealing with conversations, delivering a message. You know, they're all skills I think were generated from a young age.
That's massive, and that's I mean, I call it a story. It's kind of, it's your life essentially.
Yeah.
And that's what, again, that's what the podcast is about. That's a journey and a half that you've taken, and that shows true resilience and drive. And you've translated what you used to do on the pitch to kind of call it a 9-to-5 civvy street. And now you're working as kind of one of the, I think you said, operational director at Michael Page. And Michael Page, they're not your average run-of-the-mill kind of recruitment company. No. They're like one of the best. So that's massive. And I mean, congratulations for doing that.
No, appreciate it.
Long may it continue. Really happy. And I like this because, no disrespect to the people that I speak to on the podcast who I don't know, but in some ways it's better when you've got a connection with someone, because sometimes a story means that little bit more, because I kind of say I know you indirectly. So I mean, I'm happy for you. I'm really happy that you're obviously doing well. Great story, like I said. And for anyone listening out there, for anyone who's in a situation where they kind of got a crossroads within their career, whether they're young or old, or they're injured or whatever, they're thinking about what to do afterwards. Your true sentiment, so obviously what can actually happen if you just put your mind to it. And it's not always going to be easy. And we all know football's not easy. Tennis, whatever sport you're playing, it's not easy. So why do you think then that kind of civvy street would be any different? Sometimes you need to start from the bottom to get to middle stage and then progress onto the top. And that's just how life is in general. So, like I said,
couldn't agree more, mate. And I think, you know, you've obviously got 2 kids yourself, and you know, I've got 2 boys, and I think the biggest thing I want to instill in them is the right mindset.
Yeah.
You know, the right mindset, because I think I see it in my job now. You know, the people that are the most successful are the ones who have got the right mindset. You know, we always talk about, do you have an open mindset or a fixed mindset? You know, and if you're fixed, you put limitations on everything. You know, whereas if you've got an open mindset, there are no limitations. You can overcome anything that comes your way. You know, as long as you've got the right attitude. And yeah, so you know, I think the message you're trying to get out there, Danny, is a great one, and that's why I probably reached out to you, to be honest, to say I think my story is like quite an interesting one, because there are thousands of lads that, you know, and girls as well, depending on what they do, that will go through that experience of, you know, the first hurdle, they fall over. You know, they don't even get into the game. They don't even get any first team appearances, you know, and they've got past that point of A levels as well. What do you do then?
Yeah,
you know.
True.
So
I mean, there's a question that I always ask, and just to go back slightly on what you said, because we had a little chat up there, and you said you reached out to me, which you did, but you was already on my list anyway, because I want the podcast to be kind of well-rounded. It's not about getting superstars on or people who have had a career. It's about people who have maybe dipped their foot into sport at some stage in their kind of life, and now want to know what they're doing afterwards. So again, like I said, you're always on my list anyway. In terms of, this is like a generic question now, do you think more help's needed for athletes? So obviously we always talk about football just because of our natural connection to it, but talking about sport in general, in the UK, outside of the UK, do you think more is needed when it comes to, call it transitioning away from the game, retirement, kind of whatever spin you want to put on it? It's more or less the same thing.
I do. Yeah, I do. I think the level of support's definitely improved since we were players, you know, without a doubt. I mean, I touched on it before we did start the podcast. My brother Patrick is still involved full time actually in the game. So I mean, he's done incredibly well in his career. He's gone all the way through the coaching route. He's now under 23s coach for Derby. And you know, he's got all his badges, and you know, but me and him often talk about the level of support that young players get now versus, you know, back when we were youngsters. And it is a lot better, but it's still not good enough. You know, it's still a bit sort of, there's a bit of lip service paid to the fact that
Yeah.
Oh, there is something else, but worry about that after. You know, we'll put you in touch with some people.
Yeah.
But it's a bit ad hoc. You know, it's not structured. And I think I've heard you talk about in previous podcasts about, you know, could it be more structured? You know, could you actually have players, whilst they're still at Derby or Leicester or wherever it might be, just sampling a day in the workplace somewhere?
Yeah.
You know, it could be anything. You know, it could be anything, and it just takes them from the football environment or the sport environment and puts them into a typical work environment. And they have a day in there or a week in there even where it's like, right, if you were in this environment, what sort of skills, what sort of aspects of your you know, your skill set would you need to apply? You know, and at least then they've had a week or they've had a few days where they visually think that's what it could be like.
Yeah.
Whereas at the moment you just get people in telling them, and it's not the same. You know, it's not the same. So I think there's definitely more help, but I just think these organisations or these initiatives that are there could probably be a bit more creative or a bit more structured around it. That's all I think.
Yeah, that completely makes sense and kind of resonates with what I've said previously as well. I mean, lastly, I want you to, I don't know if you've got like any advice to anyone that may be listening, whether it be young or old, kind of just advice in terms of how to approach maybe transitioning away from sport, maybe advice that may aid you making that transition slightly easier as well.
Yeah, I think taking some time to reflect on what your skills are outside of sport, you know, outside of that sporting context. So having some time, and whether that's time to yourself or speaking to someone, a professional, whether it's a careers professional or someone just in industry, to sit with them and go, okay, I'm good at this sport, but if I just think about what else I could apply myself to, or what skills that sport has given me that I could take into a new industry, let me just write them down, you know, get it down in black and white. And I think if people did that more and they almost sort of externalized that onto paper or onto, you know, a Word document, whatever it might be, it then almost starts to form what a CV would look like, you know. And again, in my industry, you know, we have to do a lot of work around how people present themselves on paper or in person. So I think there's definitely, the advice I give to people is, how would you sell yourself outside of a sporting environment? You know, whether that's on paper or whether it's like we're doing now. You know, and almost like practice doing that. Because you never know who you're going to meet and who you could impress, you know, outside of that sporting environment.
That's massive. I mean, I generally ask that question quite a lot. I think that's probably the first time someone's ever said something along those lines. That's great advice, and anyone that's listening, I would advise taking heed of that, because it does make sense going forward. There's always people on the lookout. As you know, especially in sport, you're always meeting people. You never know who you're going to be kind of working with 10 years down the line. So it's always good to maybe give that first impression, make it a decent one.
People love sport, mate. You know, you know, the Joe Blogg on the street loves sport typically, you know. So if you've already got some common ground with someone because you've played a sport, you know, and it's typically something that people will also want to talk about. So it's then just thinking, okay, how do I take that common ground and you know, and almost take it further, really. I mean, you know, initially for me with recruitment, I'd use football as an icebreaker. You know, it was, oh yeah, who do you support? Oh, I'm a big, you know, United fan, or oh, okay, yeah, I'm a big Derby fan, and then you start to peel back the layers on, oh, okay, and it's, I used to play a little bit as well, and all of a sudden you got a client who is talking about football with you for half an hour,
Yeah.
and then you'll talk business for 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's true, and I've said that as well. I mean, I use that technique quite a lot, to be honest, and that's 100% true. It generally always works anyway. But yeah, really appreciate you coming on. Enjoy that. Hopefully we'll catch up soon. Again, we need to jump on this WhatsApp group again and get the boys from Lillishall on a night out. But who knows? Obviously, circumstances we can't do that at the moment. But really appreciate your time today, and hope everything goes well.
Hopefully, I didn't talk too much, mate.
No, that's what I want. Like I said, it's not about me. It's about the guests. So thanks for coming on, and good luck going forward.
And I think, Danny, just to say, I think it's a great podcast that you're running, mate, and I think there's been some brilliant insight already, and some great advice that people can take. So well done to you as well.
Thanks a lot, mate. Speak soon.
All right, cheers, mate. See you later.
Bye.